Hi, we made it to chapter 15. Let's get started, shall we? Will rode Tug slowly through the crowded fairground that had been set up outside the castle walls. All the villagers and inhabitants of the castle itself seemed to be out, and he had to ride carefully to ensure that Tug didn't step on someone's foot. It was harvest day, the day when all the crops had been gathered and stored for the winter months ahead. After a hard month of harvesting, the Baron traditionally allowed his people a holiday. Every year at this time, the travelling fair came to the castle and set up its booths and stalls. There were fire eaters and jugglers, singers and storytellers. There were stalls where you could attempt to win prizes by throwing soft leather balls at pyramids made from bottle-shaped pieces of wood, or by throwing hoops over squares. Will sometimes thought that the guards were perhaps just a little larger than the that the squares were perhaps just a little larger than the hoops that one was given to throw, and he had never actually seen anyone win one of the prizes. But it was all full, and the Baron paid for it from his own purse. It was all fun for it from his own purse. Right now, however, Will was not concerned with the fair and its attractions. There would be time later in the day for that. At the moment, he was on his way to meet his former wardmates. By tradition, all the castle craft masters gave their apprentices the day off on harvest day, even though had taken no part in the actual harvest themselves. Will had been wondering for weeks whether or not Holt would conform to the practice. The ranger seemed to take no notice of tradition and had his own way of doing things. But 2 nights before his anxiety had been settled, Holt had gruffly told him that he could have the holiday. Adding that he would probably forget everything that he had learned in the past 3 months. Those 3 months had been a time of constant practice with his bow and the knives that Holt had given him. 3 months of stalking through the fields outside the castle, moving from one scent patch to cover to the next, trying to make his way unobserved by Holt's eagle eyes. 3 months of riding and caring for Tug, of forming a special bond of friendship with the little pony. That he thought had been the most enjoyable part of it all. Now he was ready for a holiday and ready to enjoy himself a little. Even the thought that Horace would be there couldn't dim the pleasure. Maybe he thought a few months hard training in battle school had changed Horace's aggressive manner a little. It was Jenny who had arranged the meeting for the holiday, encouraging the others to join her with the promise of a batch of fresh mince pies that she would bring from the kitchen. She was already one of Master Chubb's prize pupils, and he boasted of her artistry to anyone who would listen, giving suitable emphasis to the to the vital role his training had played in developing her skills, of course. Will's stomach grumbled. Will's stomach grumbled with pleasure at the thought of those pies. He was starving, since he had intentionally gone without breakfast so as to leave room for them. Jenny's pies were already a byword in Castle Redmond. He had arrived at the meeting point early, so he dismounted and led Tug into the shade of an apple tree. The little pony craned his head and looked wistfully at the apples on the branches, well out of his reach. Will grinned at him and scrambled quickly up the tree, picking an apple and handing it to the pony. That's all you get, he said. You know what Holt says about eating too much. Tug shook his head impatiently. That was still a matter of disagreement between him and the ranger. Will looked around. There was no sign of the others, so he sat down in the shade of the tree, leaning his back against the knobby trunk to wait. Why, it's young Will, isn't it? Said a deep voice close behind him. Will scrambled hastily to his feet and touched his forehead in a polite salute. It was Baron Harold himself, seated astride his giant battle horse and accompanied by several of his senior knights. Yes, sir, said Wills nervously. He wasn't used to being addressed by the Baron. Happy Harvest Day to you, sir. The Baron nodded in acknowledgement and leaned forward, slouching comfortably in his saddle. Will had to crane his neck to look up at him. I must say, young man, you look quite the part there, the Baron said. I hardly saw you in that grey ranger's cloak. Has Holt been teaching you all his tricks already? Will glanced down at the grey and green molted cloak that he was wearing. Holt had given it to him some weeks ago. He'd shown Will how the grey and green mottling broke up the shape of the wearer and helped him blend into the landscape. It was one of the reasons, he'd said, why rangers could move unseen with such ease. It's the cloak, sir, Will said. Holt calls it camouflage. The Baron nodded, obviously familiar with the term, which had been a new concept to Will. Just make sure you don't use it to steal more cakes, he said with mock severity, and Will shook his head hurriedly. Oh no, sir, he said immediately. Holt told me that if I did anything like that, he'd hand the skin off my backside. He stopped awkwardly. He wasn't sure if backside was the sort of word you used in the presence of someone as exalted as a baron. The Baron nodded again, trying not to let a wide grin break through. I'm sure he did, he said. And how are you getting on with Holt, Will? Are you enjoying learning to be a ranger? Will paused. To be honest, he hadn't had time to think if he was enjoying himself or not. His days were too busy learning new skills, practicing with bow and knives, and working with Tug. This was the first time in 3 months he'd had a moment to actually think about it. I suppose so, he said hesitantly, only his voice trailed off and the Baron looked at him more closely. Only what? he prompted. Will shifted from one foot to another, wishing that his mouth didn't continually get him into these situations by talking too much. Words had a way of emerging before he'd really had time to consider whether he wanted to say them or not. Only Holt never smiles at all, he went on awkwardly. He's always so serious about things. He had the impression that the Baron was suppressing another grin. Well, said Baron Harold, being a ranger is a serious business, you know. I'm sure Holt has impressed that on you. At the time, Will said ruefully, and this time the Baron couldn't help smiling. Just pay attention to what he tells you, youngster, he said. You're learning a very important job there. Yes, sir. Will was a little surprised to realize that he did agree with the Baron. Baron Harold reached forward to gather up his reins. On an impulse, before the nobleman could ride away, Will stepped forward. Excuse me, sir, he said hesitantly, and the Baron turned back to him. Yes, Will, he asked. Will shuffled his feet again, then went on. Sir, remember when our armies fought Mortar? Baron Harold's cheerful face was clouded by a thoughtful frown. I'll not forget that in a hurry, boy, he said. What about it? Sir, what about it? Sir, Holt tells me that a ranger showed the cavalry a secret way across the slipsunder, so they were able to attack the enemy's rear. That's true, said Harold. I've been wondering, sir, what was the ranger's name? Will finished, feeling himself flush with his boldness. Didn't Holt tell you? The Baron asked. Will shrugged his shoulders. He said names weren't important. He said supper was important, but not names. But you think names are important in spite of what your master had told you, said the Baron, seeming to frown again. Will gulped and went on. I think it was Holt himself, sir, he said, and I wonder why he hadn't been decorated or honoured for his skill. The Baron thought for a moment, then spoke again. Well, you're right, Will, he said. It was Holt, and I wanted to honour him for it, but he wouldn't allow me. He said that wasn't the ranger's way. But Will began in a perplexed tone, but the Baron's upraised hand stopped him from speaking any further. You rangers have your own ways, Will, as I'm sure you're learning. Sometimes other people don't understand them. Just listen to Holt and do as he does, and I'm sure you'll have an honourable life ahead of you. Yes, sir. Will saluted again as the Baron slapped his reins lightly on his horse's neck and turned him away towards the fairground. Now enough of this, said the Baron. We can't chatter all day. I'm off to the fair. Maybe this year I'll get a hoop over one of those damn squares. The Baron started to ride away. Then a thought seemed to strike him, and he reined in for a second. Will, he called back. Yes, sir. Don't tell Holt that I told you he led the cavalry. I don't want him all angry at me. Yes, sir, Will said Will with a grin. As the Baron rode off, he settled back down to wait for his friends. Okay, well, thank you for listening up to chapter 15. If you'd like to listen to the next chapter, please stay tuned. Thank you. Bye.